Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Fremgen. And welcome to another episode of Raiders of the Long Box, where we check out old comic books from our collection, from our long box. This time we're going back to 1981, 1982-ish, with The Phantom Zone from DC Comics. DC was still just starting to play around with the concept of miniseries, which was now possible thanks to the direct market sales. Trying to do a miniseries with the old newspaper system was near impossible. DC did their first one in 1979 with The World of Krypton, then followed it up in 1980 with The Untold Legend of Batman. And now in 1981, there is The Phantom Zone. Written by Marvel mainstay Steve Gruber, and it's nearly Steve's only work for DC. And it was drawn by another Marvel mainstay, Gene Colan. Gene had done early war and romance books for DC, but this was basically his first superhero book for DC, and one of the only times he got to draw Superman. He mostly did Wonder Woman and Batman for DC, with some Spectre. Oh, and I should mention the inks were done by Tony DeZynga, who has a pretty heavy hand, I'd say. This, too, was Tony's first work on Superman and superheroes in general. Tony is most famous for inking Jonah Hex with artist Dick Ayres. So we definitely have an interesting lineup here. Now, most people know that the Phantom Zone is the spirit world prison discovered by Jor-El to imprison Kryptonian villains. The thought was it would give them time to reconsider their crimes. But it's got a pretty bad track record. I think like only 2 were ever released, and one of those was framed. The Phantom Zone first appeared in Superboy Comics number 283 in 1961. And more often than not, it was just used to talk about Kryptonian history. But the villains would come out and play every now and then. Probably the most famous villain is General Zod, and he was there in the very first issue. Though one interesting thing about General Zod is everyone just accepts him as a big bad for Superman. But back in the 60s, he spent most of his time fighting Supergirl. Zod and Superman didn't fight until 1970 as part of one of the famous Superman Flash races. The next famous Phantom Zone villain is probably Fiora, who didn't appear until 1977. In total, there are about 12 Phantom Zone villains, 2 of which were created for this series. The most used are General Zod and his flunkies, Jax-ur, Vanox, and Jor-El's cousin, kru-el. You get it? Kru-el. Anyway, the biggest Phantom Zone story around this time was in 1977 in Action Comics by Cary Bates, which introduced Fiora in a 3-part story, which is fairly similar to this miniseries. Then, of course, after that, Richard Donner's Superman movie hit, and by the release of Superman 2 in 1980, everyone knew who the Phantom Zone villains were. Or did they? Because while General Zod is from the comic books, Nam and Ursa are not. Donner just made them up. And even when the Super Friends finally got around to using the Phantom Zone villains as well, they used nobody from the comics, creating Rogar, Romlock, and Hull in 1978. They even brought back those 3 posers in 1983, though with new designs. It's kind of weird. In 1982, the Super Friends basically did General Zod, even made him look like the actor Terrence Stamp, but for some reason they named him C-Cree? I can only assume lawyers were involved. But the first time General Zod showed up in a cartoon was in Ruby Spears' Superman from 1988. They also used Fiora and Ursa? All right. Even the highly respected Superman the Animated Series made up their own Phantom Zone villain with Mala and teamed her up with General jax-ur? I mean, he's a villain from the Phantom Zone, but that's not him. Why is it so hard to adapt the Phantom Zone villains? Anyway, we're supposed to be talking about the comic book. So let's jump right into it with issue number 1, which starts off introducing us to a Daily Planet production layout artist, Charlie Quilskill. Charlie has been dreaming about Krypton, and through him, we get a brief history of the villains in the Phantom Zone. And I must say, one thing Gruber and Colin are doing here is making things quite horrific. I mean, when they give themselves page space, yikes, this is not really a kid's book. Well, we soon learn that Charlie is also become an unknowing pawn of the Phantom Zone villains. It seems that Charlie was once in the Phantom Zone as Kryptonian kru-el. I am terrible at reading these Kryptonian names. Anyway, he was in the Phantom Zone, and he was framed, so Superman released him all the way back in Superman comic books number 157 in 1962. So Gruber is using his comic book history here. And unlike, here we go again. Akbar? Yeah, I think that's it. Akbar, who, when freed from the Phantom Zone, moved to the shrunken city of Kandor to become the hero Flamebird. But kru-el exposed to gold kryptonite, removing his powers and his memories so he could just live on Earth. But now, under the villain's domination, he frees them. All of them. Well, except Mon-El. He's in the Phantom Zone, and it's a long story, so we're just going to skip that. But now, to make matters worse, Quicksilver manages to transport himself and Superman into the Phantom Zone as well. On that cliffhanger, we move to issue number 2, probably the most exciting issue of the series. Because now free on Earth, General Zod and his goons, jax-ur, Valnox, and kru-el, quickly go about their plan, taking out the Justice League and starting a World War III. There are some great scenes in here of Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, as well as Supergirl going to Batman for help, since no one knows what happened to Superman. As for the other Phantom Zone villains, we got the Mad Rayo Prophet, Jor-El, who believes their very presence on Earth is blasphemy. Then the created for this story, Nihilus, Azrael, and Naria, believe they are above caring about anything. Yet still, they viciously attack the deformed Namek. Fiora keeps an eye on Zod while doing her own thing. And Zaxo, and gosh dang it, and Zadu and Gramo, well, Gruber decided not to even use them. And my mouth thanks him. Meanwhile on Earth, Batman tries to figure out what the heck is going on as Supergirl finds out the hard way, getting ambushed by Zod and his goons. Moving on to issue number 3, things get kinda metaphysical, as Superman and Charlie attempt the unthinkable, escaping out of the back door of the Phantom Zone. Adding to the legend of the Phantom Zone, we learn that it is actually a space between our realm and the realm of a god, Aether. At least I think that's how you say that, Aether. Anyway, Superman and Charlie push past the Phantom Zone and into Aether's realm, where they are tested with bizarre layers of Aether's realm. Side note, you can kind of see how 1984's Supergirl movie's Phantom Zone is basically kind of based on this version of the Phantom Zone. Meanwhile on Earth, Zod reveals his final revenge plan on Superman to transport the whole Earth into the Phantom Zone, and assuming that Superman is helplessly watching from the zone. Now to the final issue, as both Fiora and Azrael and Nadira unleash some unspeakable carnage, we finally get what we wanted, as Superman finally escapes the Phantom Zone and he and Supergirl bring the pain to the Phantom Zone villains. Chaos mightily ensues as well, as some of the villains turn on each other. And when the dust settles, a handful of characters lay dead. All in all, it's a great climax to this story. If I have one complaint, it's they wasted too much time on Superman escaping the Phantom Zone. I mean, we know he's going to escape. We want to see the fight, right? But what we do get of the fight is good. As Grant Morrison's Lex Luthor said in All-Star Superman, people who think Superman is some kind of an altar boy have never seen him in a fight. With that, Steve Gruber really wouldn't get much Superman work later. But DC did bring him back to write the final tale of the Phantom Zone in 1986's DC Comics Presents number 97. In the same month, Alan Moore was writing the final tale of everything else about Superman and Whatever Happened to the Man of Steel. This was all getting ready for the Crisis on the Infinite Earths reboot. Now, while I wouldn't say the Phantom Zone is one of the best Superman comics, again, I feel it gets a little too bogged down in the realm of Aether. Still, it's an impressive tale, one of the most savage and interesting Superman stories. Back then, DC was really starting to push the envelope on what a superhero comic book can do, and it shows here. Anyway, before we go, let's check out all those old-timey ads. Oh, here's the ever-popular Hostess snack cake ads with Aquaman. Kind of funny that everybody could eat the snack cakes except the superheroes. Lego is kicking things up a notch here with the Expert Builder series. Bubble Yum. Tyco's electric trucking set. The usual junk from Jonathan Smith Company. See-through clothes, see-through walls, see-through clothes, see-through skin, see-through clothes, man. Then a DC House ad introducing Arion, Lord of Atlantis. Some Willy Wonka candy, and Saturday morning cartoons. Glorious. Anyway, what did you think of the Phantom Zone? Do you have this little gem? I was pretty young when I got one of the issues, and I didn't know what the heck I was reading. Years later, I did get them all, and it made more sense. Anyway, thanks for spending time with me. And if you could be so kind to like, subscribe, and notify, I promise not to try and read a Kryptonian dictionary to you. Sweet Jeebus, look at all those words.